Hi, I'm Tara Watson. I'm the David M. Rubenstein Fellow at the Brookings Institution in the Economic Studies program. I'm here to answer a few questions about my paper, Why and How to Expand U.S. Immigration. This paper is being published by the Aspen Economic Strategy Group policy volume called Economic Policy in a More Uncertain World. Even before the pandemic, the Census Bureau was projecting that immigration would fully account for the population growth between now and 2060, meaning that in the absence of immigration, the US population would actually decline between now and then. So it's important to think about immigration as a key part of our general demographic strategy. Our population is also aging, which puts a lot of pressure on our Social Security and Medicare systems, as well as our capacity to care for our older population. And our economy as a whole really depends on growth in the population, and that is going to come from immigration, and how much there is of it will depend a lot on our policy decisions going forward. I would argue that we have too little immigration in our legal system throughout all of the categories. That includes both family-based and employment-based migration. Most immigrants today come through family-based migration, meaning they have a close relative who is living in the US, and that can be helpful. It allows immigrants to come settle in the US, but we have really long backlogs, particularly for a few countries. And the total number of immigrants we let in legally through this channel hasn't changed since 1990. Also, on the employment side, we have a really outdated system. In order to come to the US, people have to have a job lined up. They typically have to have a higher level of education. And we also have caps on the numbers that can come in that way, which constrains certain countries in particular, but also really doesn't allow as much employment to come in through this this employment-based channel as would be beneficial for our economy. We have long-term shortages in some industries that aren't allowed to come in because they don't come with a lot of education. So these are things like home health aides or childcare workers, where we would see a lot of benefits from expanding the employment-based opportunities for new immigrants to come in and work in those jobs. We also have a fairly heavy reliance on temporary migration programs that allow workers to come for a short period of time and then return home. And those can be valuable when we really only have short-term needs, but we tend to over-rely on these programs in many of our industries. And what this means for workers is that they don't have bargaining powers with their employer. They're tied to one specific employer. And also it makes it harder for people who do develop roots and communities in the US when they have to leave at the end of those temporary stints of work. And so thinking about how we can transition some of those temporary slots into permanent slots and how we can grow legal immigration overall, it would be great for our economy and also would reduce some of the pressure coming from the undocumented population who for many of them, have no pathway through either the family-based or employment-based channel to come to the US. We know that immigration is good for the economy overall, and we know that immigrants tend to boost wages and employment for US-born workers. But the evidence is somewhat more mixed when we're thinking about the lower end of the income distribution and the wage distribution of US-born workers. There, it is true that to some extent, immigrants do create their own jobs. They keep some industries in the US. They encourage employers to adopt new technologies or different technologies than they otherwise would. So it's not like a one-for-one displacement between an immigrant arriving and a US-born worker, quite the contrary. However, some of the evidence does suggest there could be wage pressure for existing US workers when more immigrants come in, and we want to be careful in our immigration policy not to ignore that possibility. So it's something to keep a close eye on. Incomes have become more unequal in recent decades. It's also the case that low wage workers are facing a lot of pressures from things like automation. And as we move forward in our immigration policy, even though it's really important to expand immigration, we want to be sure that those workers aren't harmed as a result. And part of that is making sure we have a robust safety net to address any possible displacement or lower wages that comes as a result of more immigration. Personally, I'd love to see a comprehensive reform. I think there is enough consensus among the American public where we could come up with some compromises so that we could expand immigration while also addressing some of the security concerns and some of the concerns about fiscal impacts that some people have. And one thing that would be important if we did do that comprehensive reform would be to make sure it included expanded immigration over time, rather than just trading off, say, legal status for current undocumented residents with stricter border control and a more restrictionist policy. We really do need to see immigration expanded overall. However, given the current climate, I think more realistically in the short term, we should be thinking about smaller reforms that people could get behind. It's a tough climate right now, but I think most people would agree that the incredible backlogs we have in immigration processing should be a top priority. We have people waiting years to do things that are routine and could almost be automated. And another short-term fix we could think about would be addressing some of the per country caps that are really creating chaos in some parts of our immigration system. Beyond that, I think we need to come up with a number of smaller bipartisan reforms that could take place even in a polarized situation like we're in now. And hopefully, eventually, Congress will come to recognize that they are abdicating their responsibility if they don't tackle this immigration problem or issue head on.